Book 13 of Metaphysics by Aristotle, Chapter 1. Respecting indeed, then, this substance, let thus much suffice to have been spoken. But that all constitute first principles as contraries, as we have observed in our physics, this is also the case in like manner respecting immovable substances. If it is not admissible, however, that there should be anything prior to the first principle of all things, it would be impossible that the principle being anything else should be the first principle of all things, as if one should say that a thing that is white was a first principle, not so far forth as it is something else, but so far forth as it is white, and that this, notwithstanding, belonging to its subject, is white, and is something different at the same time, for that will be antecedent. But certainly all things are generated from contraries, as from a certain subject. It is requisite, then, that especially this should take place in contraries. Always, therefore, will all contraries belong to a subject, and none of them will be separable. But, as also it appears, nothing is contrary to substance, and reason certifies to the truth of this statement. Not one, therefore, of contraries is strictly a first principle of all things, but a principle that is different from these. Some, however, make one of the contraries as matter, certain of them, on the one hand, constituting the unequal as contrary to unity, that is, to equality, as if this were the nature of multitude, but some, on the other hand, making multitude or plurality contrary to unity. For numbers are generated by some, no doubt, from the unequal duad, I mean the great and small, yet a certain philosopher generates them from plurality. By both, however, this is done from the substance of unity. For the person who says that the unequal and the one constitute elements, but that the unequal, as a compound from great and small, constitutes the duad, speaks of inequality and greatness and smallness as if they were one, and he does not clearly determine that they are so in definition, but not in number. Yet, certainly, even the first principles, which they call elements, they have not correctly furnished an explanation of. Some speculators amongst them, introducing, along with unity, the great and the small, affirm that these three are elements of numbers, the two first as matter, but unity as form. Yet, according to others, the much and the few are elements, because the great and the small are naturally more peculiar properties of magnitude. But, according to the systems of others, elements are things that are more universal in the case of these, I mean the exceeding and the exceeded. There is not, after all, any difference, however, between them, so to say in regard of certain consequences that ensue, unless in respect of logical difficulties merely, which they try to guard against by themselves introducing logical demonstrations. Nevertheless, it rests on the same mode of reasoning, at any rate, namely, the assertion of the exceeding and the exceeded being first principles, but not the great and the small, and that from the elements number is prior to the duad, for both are more universal. But now do they make an assertion of the one, but do not make an assertion of the other. Others, however, have opposed diversity and difference to unity, but some introduce as principles plurality and unity. But if entities, as they are disposed that they should be, are generated from contraries, but to unity either nothing is contrary, or if then there is likely to be anything, it is plurality, and if the unequal is contrary to the equal, and the diverse to the same, and the different to the same, if all this be the case, most especially are those persons who oppose unity to plurality in possession of a certain opinion that may be urged in their defense. Nor, however, have even these speculators adequately proved their hypothesis, for unity will constitute what is fewness, for plurality is opposed to paucity, but the much to the few. Now, as regards unity, that it signifies a measure is evident, and in everything is there something different that may be classed as a subject, as in harmony the diesis, and in magnitude a finger or foot, or something else of this description, but in rhythm the basis or syllable. And in like manner also, in weight there is a certain definite standard of measure, and according to the same manner also it is with all things. In qualities there is found a certain definite quality, but in quantities a certain definite quantity, and that which is indivisible constitutes the measure. For one sort of measure subsists according to the form, and another according to sense, so that there does not exist any substance that is essentially one. And this assumption rests on what is in accordance with reason. For unity signifies that it constitutes a measure of a certain plurality or multitude, and number that it is plurality measured, and a multitude of measures. Wherefore also it may be concluded reasonably enough that unity is not number, for neither is the measure a standard of measure, but a first principle, and the measure and unity. It is necessary, however, always that measure should subsist as something that is the same in all things, as, for instance, if a horse is the measure, that such should be horses, and if a man, men. But if man, and horse, and a god are measures, they will perhaps be animal, and the number of them will be animals. But if man, and white, and walking be such, by no means of these will there be number, from the fact of all subsisting in one and the same subject according to number. Yet, nevertheless, there will exist a number of the genera of these, or of some other such category. But those who make the unequal as a certain unity, but the indefinite duad from great and small, put forward an assertion very far from the truth of things that are apparent and possible. For these are both passions and accidents, rather than subjects of numbers and magnitudes. For the much and few constitute passive states of number, and great and small of magnitude, just as even and odd, and smooth and rough, and straight and curved. Moreover also, in addition to this error, it is necessary likewise that the great and the small, and all things of this kind, should be relatives. But relation, least of all the categories, constitutes a certain nature, or substance, and is subsequent both to quality and quantity, and is a certain passive condition of quantity, which subsists in relation to something, as has been declared, but does not constitute matter, or anything else, and, in general, subsists in regard of what is common in relation to something, and in the parts and species of this. For there is nothing that is either great or small, or much or few, and, in short, which subsists as a relative, which is not much or few, or great or small, or a relative, at the same time that it is something else. That relation, however, in the smallest degree constitutes a certain substance, and a certain entity, is indicated by the fact of there belonging to it alone neither generation, nor corruption, nor motion, just as with respect to quantity there is increase and diminution, with respect to quality, alteration, with respect to place, motion, with respect to substance, generation simply and corruption. But this is not the case with respect to relation. For without being put in motion, at one time it will be greater, and at another time less or equal, so far forth as the other is put in motion according to quantity. And it is necessary that the matter of everything should be such as the thing itself in capacity. Wherefore also will this be the case with the matter of substance. But relation constitutes substance, neither in capacity nor in energy. Therefore it would be absurd, nay, rather impossible, the constituting non-substance an element of substance, and a thing that is antecedent to it, for all the categories are what is subsequent. But, further, elements are not predicated as elements of each of the things of which they are elements, but the much and few, both separately and simultaneously, are predicated of number, and the long and the short of a line, and a surface is both broad and narrow. But if, doubtless, also, there exists a certain multitude of things to which always there belongs something indeed that is few, as, for example, the duad. For if this were much, unity would constitute fewness, and if it were much absolutely, it would be much after the same manner as the decade. And if this be not the case, it will be more than this, nay, even than 10,000. How then will number, on supposition of the foregoing in this way, consist of few and much? For either both ought to be predicated, or neither. But in the present instance, only one of these is predicated. Chapter 2. But it is necessary absolutely to examine as to whether then it is admissible that things which are eternal should be composed from elements, for they will in such a case involve matter. For everything that is compounded of elements constitutes a composite nature. If therefore it is necessary that a thing be generated from that of which it consists, both if it exists invariably and if it were invariably generated, but everything is generated from that which subsists in capacity, I mean the thing which is being generated, for it could not have been produced from that which is impossible, nor had it any existence before it was generated. But that which is possible admits of subsisting in energy, and not of subsisting in this way. Now, if this be the case, that number also, most eminently above all things, always subsists, or anything else that involves matter, it would admit of non-existence, just as that also which involves the space of one day, and that which possesses any amount of years whatsoever. Now, if this be so, thus much will be true of time also, when it is extended so as to be without limit. There would not, then, exist things eternal, since that is not a thing eternal which admits of non-existence, as it has come in our way to treat of this subject in other portions of our philosophic discourses. If that, however, which is now asserted be true universally, that no one substance is eternal unless it subsist in energy, and that the elements are the matter of substance, there will not exist elements of any eternal substance from which, as inherent, this substance is composed. But there are some persons who make an indefinite duad the element, together with unity. But as to the unequal, they reasonably enough encounter difficulties on account of coincident impossibilities, from whom so many merely of the difficulties are removed as necessarily arise, on account of the making inequality and relation an element, to those who make assertions in this way. As many difficulties, however, as ensue independent of this opinion, these it is necessary should exist for those also, both whether they constitute out of them ideal number, and whether they do so with mathematical number likewise. Many indeed, therefore, are the sources of the error with respect to these causes, but particularly does this remark apply to the doubt prevalent downwards from antiquity. For it appeared to the philosophers of ancient days that all entities will be one, I mean entity itself, unless one should adduce a solution of the doubt, and at the same time would advance in the investigation in a line parallel with the theory of Parmenides. But there is a necessity for showing, in regard of its existence, that non-ens has an existence. For in this way, out of entity and something else will entities arise, supposing they are many. Although in the first place, indeed, will this be true if entity is denominated multifariously. For one entity signifies that a thing constitutes substance, and another that it is quality, and another that it is quantity, and so of the rest of the categories therefore. What sort of one will all the entities in such a case be, if non-entity will not have an existence? Whether will they be substances, or passive conditions, and other things truly in like manner? Or will they constitute all things, and the one will be this particular thing, and such like, and so much, and such other particulars, as signify one certain entity? But absurd, nay, rather impossible, would be the assertion that one certain nature produced should be a cause, and that of this entity and of the same entity something should be this particular thing, and something else should be endued with quality, and that this should belong to quantity, and that to the place where. In such a case, may I ask, from what sort of non-entity and entity will entities subsist. For also multifariously is denominated non-entity, since likewise this is the case with entity, and non-man signifies that which is not this, and the non-straight, the not being a thing of this description, and the being not 3 cubits, that which does not possess this particular quality of measure. Of what sort, therefore, of entity and non-entity are many classes of entities? Now, an advocate of this opinion is desirous of asserting what is false, and of calling this nature non-entity, out of which and entity arise the many classes of entities that are generated. Wherefore also it was said that it is requisite that something that is false be supposed in the same manner as also geometricians allow, hypothetically, that a thing is pedal which is not pedal. And it is impossible that these things be so. For neither do geometricians suppose anything that is false, for that is not what is the object of the proposition in the syllogism, nor are things generated, nor corrupted from that which constitutes non-entity after this mode. Since, however, non-entity, according to its declensions, is styled in an equal number of ways with the categories, and besides this, that is denominated non-entity which subsists as what is false, and that which subsists according to potentiality from this generation takes place. From that which is not man, but man in capacity, is generated a man, and a thing that is white from that which is not white in energy, but white in capacity. And in like manner is it the case whether both one certain thing is generated, and whether many are. The inquiry, however, appears to be as to how ends, which is predicated according to substances, should constitute what is plural. For numbers and lengths and bodies are things that are being produced. Now, absurd is the inquiry as to how indeed entity, which constitutes the nature of some particular thing, is plural, and not also to inquire how it possesses either qualities or quantities. For, beyond all doubt, the indefinite duad is not a cause, nor yet the great and the small, that 2 things are white, or that there are many colours, or tastes, or figures, for these would be numbers and monads. But really, supposing that they attended to these inquiries at least, they would have perceived also in them the cause, for the same thing, and that which is analogous or proportional would constitute a cause. For the actual deviation is a cause also of the opposition that is under investigation by them, as subsisting between entity and unity, from which and from these such persons seek to generate entities, and have adopted their hypothesis in regard of relation and inequality, because there neither exists a contrary, nor negation of these, but one nature of entities, as both this particular thing and that particular quality. And one ought also to institute this inquiry, namely, as to how relatives are plural, but not single. In the present case, however, the inquiry is as to how there are numerous monads beside the first one, but they do not also further inquire how there are many unequals beside the unequal, although they employ and affirm the existence of the great, the small, the much, the few, of which numbers consist, the long, the short, of which length consists, the broad, the narrow, of which the surface is composed, the deep, the low, of which the bulks consist, and in this way further, they without doubt affirm the existence of as many species of relatives as they may introduce. What, therefore, let me ask, is the cause with these of their being plural? It is requisite, therefore, indeed, as we have affirmed, that entity in capacity should be supposed as subsisting in each of these. But by one who makes these assertions is this also evinced, namely, that this particular thing constitutes an entity in capacity, and a substance, but non-entity in itself, because it constitutes a relative, just as if he should speak of something of such a quality, which is neither unity nor entity in capacity, nor a negation of unity, nor of entity, but one certain thing, which is something belonging to entities. And much more will this be the case, as has been declared if he prosecuted the inquiry as to the manner how entities are plural, not through the investigation as to the mode those things that belong to the same predicamental line constitute many substances, or many things endued with qualities, but how they are many entities. For some things are substances, but some passive states, and some relations. In the case, therefore, of the rest of the categories, the subsistence of plurality involves the matter also of some other investigation. For, on account of their not being separable as the subject becomes, and is plural, and those things that are endued with qualities and quantities are plural likewise, although at least it be necessary that there should subsist a certain matter for every genus, save that it is impossible that it should involve an existence separable from substances. In the case, however, of those things subsisting as a certain particular thing, there is involved some reason in the inquiry how this particular thing is plural, if it will not be something particular, and this very particular thing, and a certain nature of this description. But rather does this doubt originate from hence, how quantities are many substances in energy, but not one. However, without doubt, even though this particular thing is not the same with that which is a certain quantity, it is not expressed how and why entities are plural, but how and why quantities are plural. For every number signifies a certain quantity, and the monad constitutes nothing else than a measure, because it is according to quantity what is indivisible. If, therefore, a quantity be different from that which subsists as a definite particular, from what it is that such definite particular results is not declared, nor how plurality subsists. But if it is the same, the person who makes the assertion supports many contrarieties. And one may also prosecute the inquiry as regards number, whence are we to obtain our confidence as to their existence? For in the doctrine of ideas, the idealists furnish a certain cause for entities, since each one of the numbers constitutes a certain idea. But the idea is the cause of existence to other things, in some way or other to be sure. For let this be assumed as a supposition of theirs. To one, however, who does not think in this way, on account of discerning inherent difficulties independent of the doctrine of ideas, the case is different, so that on this account at least he does not constitute them as numbers. But to one who introduces mathematical number, whence, may I ask, is it necessary even to have confidence in the existence of number of such a description, and in what respect will such be serviceable to other things? For neither does such a one say that it is the cause of anything who affirms its existence, but such a one asserts it as being a certain nature which involves an essential subsistence. Nor does it appear that it is a cause, for all the speculations of arithmeticians, as has been stated, will likewise have an existence as conversant with objects cognizant to our senses. Chapter 3. Those, therefore, that posit the existence of ideas, and say that these are numbers, should make an attempt to inform us how and why they subsist, since, according to the exposition of each, every idea constitutes one certain thing that is different from what we regard the many as being. Doubtless, however, since these things are neither necessary nor possible, neither is it to be affirmed that mathematical number exists separably on account of these at least. But the Pythagoreans, on account of their perceiving many passive qualities of numbers as subsisting in bodies cognizant to the senses, made entities to be numbers, I admit, not involving, however, a separable existence, but they regarded entities as compounded from numbers. And why so? Because the passive qualities of numbers subsist in harmony, and in the heaven, and in many other things. To those, however, who maintain that mathematical number exists merely, nothing of this kind is it admissible for them to affirm, that is, if they follow their own hypothesis. But it was asserted by them, because of these will there not exist systems of scientific knowledge. We assert, however, that the case stands as we affirmed formerly, and it is evident that mathematical numbers do not possess a separated subsistence, for if they did, the passive qualities of those that have actually been separated would not have been resident in bodies. The Pythagoreans indeed, therefore, as regards a point of this description, are not deserving of reprehension in any way, but so far, however, as they constitute physical or natural bodies out of numbers, or, in other words, from things not possessing gravity, nor having lightness, things involving lightness and heaviness, so far, I say, they seem to speak respecting another heaven and other bodies, but not of those that fall under the notice of our senses. Those, however, who constitute number as involving a separable subsistence, because axioms will not exist as inherent in objects cognizant to the senses, the assertions, likewise, of the existence of the other, that is, of the mathematical entities, will be true, and these serve to cause a soothing sensation in the soul. And they suppose that numbers exist and involve a separable subsistence, and in like manner is it the case with the magnitudes of the mathematicians. It is evident, therefore, that also the adverse argument will enunciate things that are contrary, and the point which just now has been declared a matter of doubt must be decided by those who speak in this way, namely, as to why, on the supposition of these things not by any means being inherent in objects cognizant to our senses, the passive qualities of them should be insensibles. But there are some who, from the fact of the existence of boundaries and extremities, viz., from a point being the boundary of a line, and again a line of a surface, and a surface of a solid, imagine that natures of this description exist necessarily. Therefore, one ought also to discover, as regards this reason, whether it may not in reality be very weak. For neither are extremities substances, but rather do all these constitute limits or boundaries, since both of walking and in general of motion there exists a certain limit. Is therefore this limit some particular thing and a certain substance? But to indulge in such a supposition is absurd. Certainly, however, admitting that they have an existence, all of them would be found amongst those objects that fall under the notice of our senses, for the argument itself proclaims their existence in these. Why, then, will they involve a separable subsistence? But further, would one who was not very credulous investigate respecting, therefore, of course, every number and mathematical natures, as to why such as these as are prior contribute nothing to those that are subsequent? For, according to those who say that mathematical natures merely exist, though number should not have any existence, yet magnitudes will have a subsistence, and though even these were not in existence, yet still would the soul exist, and such bodies as are cognizant to our senses. It does not, however, appear from the phenomena that nature is devoid of a connection with herself, just in the way that a vicious tragedy might be. With those, however, who are for establishing the subsistence of ideas, this, no doubt, escapes them, for they constitute magnitudes out of matter and number, from the duad indeed, lengths, and from the triad, surfaces, perhaps, and from the tetrad, solids, or also from other numbers, for there is no difference. But whether, one may ask, will these exist at any rate as ideas, or what, pray, will be the manner of their subsistence, and in what way are they contributors to entities as to their being? For, as with mathematical entities, so do these neither contribute anything in that way. But, assuredly, neither of these doth there exist at least any theorem, unless one should choose to put in motion mathematical entities, and to create certain peculiar opinions of his own. But it is not difficult for those who put forward any description of hypotheses whatsoever to be able to be prolix and to speak without ceasing. Those, therefore, who cement together mathematical entities with ideas are in this way guilty of error. But the earliest amongst these speculators, having constituted two numbers, the one of form and the other of a mathematical nature, by no means either have declared, or would they be able to say, the manner how this is effected, and from what mathematical number will be compounded, for they make it intermediate between formal and sensible number. For if we suppose that it is composed of the great and small, the same will it be with that which is belonging to the ideas. But if from some other thing that is small and great, this will not be the case, for number produces magnitudes. But if he will speak of anything different, he will affirm the existence of many elements. And if the first principle of each thing constitutes a certain original unity, there will be in the case of these a something that is common, namely, unity. We must likewise investigate how, also, these many are one, and at the same time, in regard of the fact that it is an impossibility that number should be produced otherwise than from either unity and an indefinite duad. Therefore are all these consequences irrational, and they are at variance both themselves with one another and with those statements that are reasonable, and there appears to be inherent in them the long discourse of Simonides. For a long discourse is like that of the slaves, when no wholesome assertion is made. But also they appear with respect to those elements, the great and the small, to bawl out as if they were being dragged away with violence. For by no means are they able to generate number without doubling that which proceeds from unity. But it is absurd, nay, rather, a certain one of the impossibilities of this system, to introduce generation in the case of entities that are eternal. As to the Pythagoreans indeed, therefore, they have no need to labour under doubt whether they do not introduce, or do introduce, generation. For they manifestly affirm that unity has been established, and that, accordingly, what is immediately nearest to the infinite, whether from surfaces, or from colour, or from seed, or from such things as they are at a loss to declare, is so because it has been dragged forward, and bounded by a limit or termination. Since, however, they frame cosmogonies, and wish to express themselves physically, it is just that they should institute some inquiry concerning nature, but as a departure from the present method of investigation. For we are engaged in the investigation of the first principles belonging to things that are immovable. Wherefore also we must examine into the generation of numbers of this kind. Chapter 4. They do not speak of the generation of the odd number, therefore, as if it were a thing evident that of the even there is in existence a generation. But the even, in the first instance, certain speculators constitute from unequals, I mean, the great and small equalized. It is, then, with them necessary that inequality should be prior to the equalization of these. If, however, there always existed things in a state of equalization, they would not have been unequal at a prior period. For of that always existing there is not anything prior. Wherefore it is evident that it is not for the purpose of speculation that they make the generation of numbers. It involves, however, a doubt and a subject matter for reprehension to one who acquires knowledge judiciously, how disposed, in respect of the good and the fair, are elements and first principles. The doubt, I mean, is as follows, namely, whether any of those is such as we are disposed to denominate the good itself and the best, or whether they are not of this sort, but are of subsequent growth. For the difficulty appears to be acknowledged by theologians, by certain amongst those of the present day, who do not actually make an assertion of this description, but who maintain that from the principle of progression found in the nature of entities, the good and the fair make their appearance on the stage of creation. This, however, they do, cautious about falling into a real difficulty which ensues unto the systems of those who affirm, as some do, that unity constitutes a first principle of things. But the difficulty to which I allude is not started on account of this, namely, their ascribing the well to a first principle as a thing that is implanted in it, but from the fact of their making unity a first principle, and a first principle as an element, and number as consisting from unity. But the poets, those of the early ages, acted in a way similar to this, so far as they assert the dominion and the rule not of these first principles, such as night and heaven or chaos, or even Oceanus, but of Jupiter. Notwithstanding, to these persons does it happen that they assert things of this description on account of their changing the dominative principles of the universe, because those of these speculators that, at any rate, were for adopting principles of a mingled description, and in respect of their not broaching their theories in a fabulous garb, for example, as Pherecydes and certain others, have in point of fact established, quote, the best, close quote, as the earliest principle of generation. And this is the case also with the Magi, and with the Sophoi, or sages of a subsequent period, such as both Empedocles and Anaxagoras, one of whom constituted harmony as an element, and the other made mind a first principle of things. Of those philosophers, however, who asserted the existence of immovable substances, some, I admit, affirm unity to constitute the actual good. They, however, in the most eminent degree, regarded unity to constitute the substance of the good. The matter of doubt, of course, therefore, comes to this, as to what way scientific men ought to express themselves on this subject. It would, however, be surprising if in that which is original and eternal and most self-sufficient for its own subsistence, this very original attribute, I mean, the self-sufficiency and the conservation of itself, should not be discovered as that which constitutes what is good. But undoubtedly, not on account of anything else is it incorruptible or sufficient to itself, than on account of its existence or condition of subsistence after an excellent mode. Wherefore, indeed, the assertion of the existence of a first principle of this description appears reasonable, as far as its reality is concerned. For this, however, to be unity, or if not unity, both an element and an element of numbers, is impossible, for much difficulty is coincident with an hypothesis of this kind. And certain speculators, in their attempts to avoid this, have lost sight of the point in question, when they acknowledged unity to constitute an original first principle and an element of things, but a principle and an element of number, however, I mean mathematical number. For, supposing this to be the case, all the monads would become a something that is good, and there would exist a certain fair supply of things which are good. Further, if forms constitute numbers, all the forms will be such as some certain thing or other that is good. Notwithstanding, let anyone suppose the existence of ideas of any description whatsoever he feels disposed to admit, for allowing that they are to be classed amongst things that are good merely, ideas will not constitute substances. But if, also, they are to rank amongst substances, all animals and plants are good, and the participants of these likewise. Now, both do these absurdities concur with this hypothesis, and what is contrary constitutes an element, whether we assume it to be plurality or inequality, and great and small will amount to what is an actual evil. Wherefore, no doubt, a certain philosopher avoided the connection of the good with unity, as if on this hypothesis it would be what is contrary, since generation arose from contraries, that the nature of plurality should necessarily be evil. Some, however, affirm the unequal to be the nature of evil. Therefore, do all these entities happen to have a share in what is evil, except unity, which constitutes actual unity. And we find that numbers participate in a more unmixed state than magnitudes. It also follows that evil is a place of the good, and that it shares in and desires after that which is subject to decay of itself. For one contrary is corruptive of another contrary. And if it is the case, as we have affirmed, that matter constitutes everything that subsists in capacity, as fire in capacity is the matter of fire in energy, evil will constitute the good itself in potentiality. Now, all these results concur partly in consequence of their constituting every first principle as an element, and partly in consequence of their making contraries first principles, and partly because they make unity itself a first principle of things, and partly because they regard numbers as first substances, and such as involve a separable subsistence, and because they take the same view of the species or forms. Chapter 5. If therefore also the non-positing of the good in the rank of first principles, and the positing it in the way we have alluded to, be what is impossible, it is evident that first principles are not correctly assigned, nor the primary substances. Yet one does not form his opinions correctly, either if he should assimilate the first principles of the universe to the principle belonging to animals and plants, because from things that are indefinite and unfinished there arise always things that are more perfect. Wherefore also, in the case of the primary substances, they affirm that it happens in this way that neither does any particular entity constitute actual unity. For in objects that are here, that is, that fall under the notice of our senses, are the first principles perfect, from which these objects derive their original. For man begets man, and the seed is not that which is first. But it would be absurd also the making a place along with mathematical solids, for the place of singulars is peculiar to them, wherefore are they topically or locally separable. Mathematical solids, however, are not situated in any certain locality, and the assertion that they will be situated indeed somewhere, and at the same time not to say what the place is absurd. But it would become those who say that entities are compounded of elements, and that numbers are the first of entities, that they should, by thus making a division as to how one thing derives an existence from another, express themselves in such a way as to make us acquainted after what manner number originates from certain first principles, whether this takes place by means of mixture. Neither, however, is everything that has undergone mixture different from that which is being produced, and unity will not be a thing that involves a separable subsistence, nor a different nature, but they wish that it should be after this manner. Does number, however, we may ask, subsist through composition as a syllable? But in this case it is requisite that there should be position, and he who employs his understanding thereupon will comprehend unity apart from plurality. Number, then, will constitute this, that is, a monad, and plurality, or unity and inequality. And since that body, which subsists from certain entities, subsists partly as from things that are inherent, and partly that this is not the case, in which, may I ask, will number be found? For those things which do not subsist in this way, as from those that are inherent, are no other than those of which there is generation. Does it, however, then subsist as from seed? But it is not possible for anything to proceed forth from what is indivisible. Shall we say, however, that it arises from a contrary that does not involve a permanent subsistence? But whatever things subsist in this manner are also from something else that does possess a permanent subsistence. Since, therefore, as regards unity, one philosopher, in fact, posits it as a thing that is contrary to plurality, and another as what is contrary to inequality, employing unity as if it were equality, number should, therefore, subsist as if it were from contraries. There will then be something else from which, as involving a permanent subsistence, a generation of the other is brought about. Further, why then, at all, are the other things of this sort subject to decay, as many as have their existence from contraries, or wherein contraries are to be found? Why, I say, are they subject to decay, even though they may arise from everything? And yet that this be not the case with number. For, respecting this, nothing is declared, although a contrary, which is both inherent and not inherent, destroys that which is contrary to itself, as, for instance, discord, mixture, and yet, at any rate, such ought not necessarily to be the case, for the former is not contrary to the latter at least. There has been, however, no determination arrived at either as to the mode in which numbers are causative of substances and of existence, whether as limits, for example, points of magnitudes, and, according to the arrangements adopted by Eurytus, that a certain number belongs to a certain thing, as this number belongs to man, and that to horse, just as they who refer numbers to figures, the triangle and the square thus assimilating the forms of plants to pebbles of calculation. Or shall we say that this is the case with the ratio or the symphony of numbers? And in like manner it is so as regards man and everything else. But as regards then the passive states, how, may I ask, are they numbers, such as the white, and sweet, and hot? That numbers, however, do not constitute substances, and that they are not causes of form, is plain. For reason, that is, the formal principle, constitutes substance, but number constitutes matter, as the number or substance of flesh or bone. In this way are there 3 of fire, and 2 of earth, and number, whatsoever it may be, is invariably of certain things, and constitutes either what is fiery, or earthy, or of the nature of a monad. Substance, however, is that which consists in being so much with relation to so much, according to mixture, but this no longer constitutes number, but a proportion or ratio of the mixture of corporeal numbers, or certain other things. Neither, therefore, does number constitute a cause in respect of production, nor does it as number exist at all, nor as such number as is of the nature of a monad, nor as matter, nor as the formal principle, and the form itself of things. But undoubtedly neither does it constitute that on account of which a thing subsists, I mean, of course, the final cause of things. Chapter 6. One, however, might also doubt what, quote, the well, close quote, is which originates from numbers, if mixture is to be found in number, either in that which is rational, or in that which is odd. For now would nothing more conducive to health arise from water and honey being thrice 3 times mingled, but it would be of more service in that way, supposing that there were to subsist no proportion in the condiments, but that it be watery, or in number that which is an unmixed entity. Further, the ratios, I mean those belonging to the mixtures, consequent upon the addition of numbers, are not found in numbers themselves, as the ratio between 3 and 2 is that of 3:2. Not thrice 2, however, for there ought to be the same genus in the multiplications. Wherefore it is necessary that both by the A should be measured the order in which the A, B, G is to be found, and by the D, that which D, E, Z will assume. Wherefore there must be the same measure in all things. Therefore there will be of fire B, E, G, Z, and of water the number twice 3. But if it be necessary that all things should participate of number, it is requisite likewise that there should be a concurrence of many things that are the same, and that there should be the same number for this and for another. Is this thing therefore a cause, and on account of this is there anything that is done? Or is it obscure, such for instance as is a certain number of the revolutionary movements of the sun, and again of those of the moon, and the life and age of each of the animal creation at least? What obstruction then, I may ask, is there to some of these being square, but others of them cubical, and equal to each other, and others twofold. For there is no hindrance to this, but it is necessary that they be intimately connected with these, if all things are wont to participate in common of number, and if it should be admissible that things which differ from each other should fall under the same number. Wherefore, if the same number happens to be found in certain things, those will be the same with one another, having the same form of number, as sun and moon will be the same, having the same numerical form. But why are these causes of things? There are 7 vowels, no doubt, and 7 chords or harmonies, and 7 Pleiades, and within 7 years some animals cast their teeth, some at any rate do so, and some do not. And 7 in number were those warriors that undertook the famous expedition against Thebes. Is it then the case, because such a particular number is naturally suited for such purposes, that on this account either those chieftains amounted to 7, or that the Pleiades consist of 7 stars, or were the septum contra Thebes so on account of the gates of Thebes, or through some other different cause? If, however, we reckon in this manner, and assign 12 stars to Arcturus at least, yet others agree in assigning a greater number, since X, Y, Z, they affirm 2 constitute symphonies, and that because those are 3, these also are 3. But that there may be 10,000 things of this sort, no one in the least feels any concern, for G and R would be one sign. But if because each of the others is twofold, but another is not so, now the cause is, inasmuch as there being 3 places, 1 in each is added to S. On this account there subsist 3 only, but not because there are 3 symphonies, since there are at least more symphonies than 3. Yet in the present instance there cannot any longer be more than 3. Now, these philosophers also are not unlike the ancient interpreters of Homer, who discover minute, but fail to observe important similitudes. Certain speculators, however, assert that there are many such like particulars, as, for instance, even as regards media, one medium is 9, whereas another is 8, and a verse of 17 feet is equal in number to these. Now, they say that the verse ascends on the right in 9 syllables, but in 8 on the left, and that the distance is equal, both in letters from A to Z, and in musical instruments from the most grave sound to the most acute, the number of which constitutes an equality in the all various melody of the heaven. One ought not, however, to observe things of this kind, for no one would entertain a shadow of doubt as regards them. Nor ought we to make any assertions concerning them, nor to attempt to discover them in things that are eternal, since also they are to be discovered in things that are subject to corruption. Those natures, however, in numbers that are the subjects of applause, and the things contrary to these, and in general those that fall under our notice in the mathematical sciences, as some in fact affirm them to be, and constitute them as causes of nature, appear to persons at least, who view the matter in this light, to escape their notice. For, according to no one of the modes of those that are defined respecting first principles, is any of them causative, and yet they do make manifest that point, namely, that the well has a subsistence, and that to the coordination in the case of the fair belong the odd, the straight, the equal, the powers of certain numbers. For at the same time subsist seasons, and such a particular number, and other things therefore of this sort, such as they gather from mathematical theorems. These all involve this power or capacity. Wherefore also they seem like unto casual coincidences, for they are accidents no doubt, yet all are appropriate to one another. The analogical, however, is one. For in each category of entity is there the analogical, as the straight in length is analogous to the even in superficies, to perhaps the odd in number, and in colour to the white. Further, numbers which are in the species do not constitute causes of things harmonic and the like, for those that are equals in the species differ from each other, for likewise do the monads differ. Wherefore, on account of these things at least, we must not constitute them species. As regards the consequences indeed then that ensue, both these, and even still more than these, can be collected. They appear, however, to furnish a proof of the fact that the supporters of the ideal hypothesis fall into many errors respecting the generation of them, and that in no way can a connexion be traced in their systems, inasmuch as mathematical species do not involve a subsistence separable from sensibles, as some affirm, nor do these constitute the first principles of things. End of Book 13 and end of Metaphysics.